The heavy glass doors of the boardroom sealed me inside a room full of people who had already decided I no longer existed. 3 years of my life, written across 40 slides of groundbreaking biotech research, flickered on the giant monitor behind me as the senior partners stared with hollow pity. Before I could even finish my opening sentence, the CEO daughter drifted into the room wearing a tailored white blazer that cost more than my apartment lease. She did not offer an apology as she casually stepped between me and the investors, taking control of the presentation remote with a smooth smile. The room shifted its focus in an instant, leaving me frozen in place while my work was swept aside like old trash. This young woman had arrived at our firm 8 months ago with 0 lab experience, yet she moved with the ultimate confidence of someone who had never been told no. As she pulled up her own set of slides, she leaned near my shoulder and whispered that my ideas were no longer needed. She then spoke up for the entire room to hear, falsely claiming that while I had laid some basic groundwork, her new strategy was the true path forward for the company. Standing on the sidelines, I watched her display concepts that were unmistakably mine, right down to the specific molecular formulas I had logged in my private research journals. The investors, who had spent the last hour treating me like a ghost, suddenly sat up and showered her with enthusiastic praise. The principal partner even stood up to congratulate her on what he called a brilliant commercial breakthrough. I quietly packed up my laptop, slid my security badge onto the mahogany table, and walked out while they were already mapping out multi-million-dollar expansion plans. I drove back to my apartment with my hands shaking so hard I could barely keep the car in its lane. I had dedicated every waking hour to solving a complex drug delivery challenge, coming from a working-class background where nothing was ever handed to me. The chief executive had hired me 4 years ago, praising my unconventional background and self-taught methods, but everything changed when his daughter joined the firm. I had trusted her when she asked detailed questions about my laboratory notes, completely unaware that she was studying my work only to steal it. By the time I fed my cat and sat down at my desk, my phone was buzzing non-stop with urgent messages. My closest lab colleague texted to ask why the whole office was in a panic, followed immediately by a firm demand from the executive asking where I was. I turned off the screen and focused on the real work, knowing that the trap I had set was about to spring. The corporate leaders thought they had stripped me of my legacy, but they failed to realize that copying a presentation is very different from understanding the actual science behind it. The next morning, I returned to the research facility dressed impeccably, ready to face whatever storm was waiting for me. The security guard looked stunned to see me, whispering that word of my sudden departure had already spread through the building. Inside the main facility, colleagues turned away as I packed the remaining books from my desk, but the heavy silence was broken when the executive shouted my name from across the floor. He looked pale and rattled as he motioned for me to step into his corner office immediately. Once the door was shut, the executive dropped his polished act and angrily demanded to know what I had done to the system data. He explained that the investment group was arriving in an hour for a live demonstration, but none of the lab technicians could replicate the core chemical reaction. I looked him dead in the eye and reminded him that his daughter had claimed full ownership of the project during yesterday's meeting. If her concept was truly superior, then she should have no trouble running the demonstration without any assistance from me. Before he could respond, his daughter burst into the office with a look of pure panic replacing her usual arrogance. She accused me of sabotaging the network, admitting in her confusion that their entire new strategy relied entirely on my original stabilization process. I gathered my belongings, looked at both of them, and pointed out that science requires actual knowledge rather than stolen slides. As I walked out of the building for the final time, the principal investor was already pulling into the parking lot, completely unaware of the disaster waiting inside. Sitting in my car across the street, I waited for the inevitable fallout to play out behind those glass windows. Less than 20 minutes later, my phone rang with a call from the principal investor, his voice tight with frustration as he asked to meet me at a nearby cafe. When I walked in, he offered to triple my previous salary and grant me company shares if I would return to fix the broken demonstration. I calmly declined his offer, revealing that the CEO daughter had stolen incomplete notes and that his firm was about to invest $80 million into a complete lie. I handed him a simple business card with a direct phone number, inviting his group to a private presentation later that afternoon if they wanted to see the real technology. When I returned home, messages from my former lab partners confirmed that the facility was in absolute chaos, with the executive firing employees out of sheer desperation. I spent the rest of the morning finalizing my legal strategy, fully prepared for the decisive meeting that would reshape my entire professional career. At 3 o'clock, I walked into a private conference room downtown to find all 6 major investors waiting for me. I presented the complete, refined methodology for the targeted medicine delivery system, proving that I had legally registered the core intellectual property under my own independent venture weeks prior. When asked how I anticipated the betrayal, I explained that after catching the executive daughter snooping through my desk months ago, I had intentionally kept the final critical steps out of the company databases to protect my life's work. The investors were stunned by the documentation and security footage I provided, realizing they had almost backed a fraudulent project. Within 48 hours, funding for my former company was completely pulled, causing their stock value to plummet while board members forced the executive to step down. Later that evening, the daughter even came to my small lab space, humbled and defeated, asking how I had seen through her plan from the very beginning. I told her that while she was studying my notes, I was busy studying her character. The next day, the investment group officially signed a multi-million-dollar funding deal with my new enterprise, allowing me to hire the key scientists who had left the old firm. As I stood in our new facility surrounded by a team that truly respected the work, I received a package containing my original lab notebook alongside a note from the former CEO asking if the destruction was worth it. Looking at the thriving environment I had built from scratch on my own terms, the answer was clearer than ever.